Please take this opportunity to silence your cell phones. We will begin very shortly. From Workday, Josh Lannin.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. Tad and I are so excited to represent Workday and talk about our journey building Workday for Slack. Whether you're a two-person development team or part of a larger development group, building an enterprise-grade Slack app requires a lot of considerations. Who are your users? How are they going to engage with your app? How do they engage with Slack itself? And how are you going to build to meet the needs of a global enterprise? These are some of the things that we've worked on in the last year in building our app, and we're excited to have the opportunity to share some of those lessons learned with you here today. It's great to be here in San Francisco. A year ago, we were about 4 months into the development of our Workday Slack app, and frankly, we had a lot more questions than we had answers. But we came here to Spec and learned so much from the community. It really helped set us on a great roadmap that's helped us with our delivery of our app now to all of our customers. I want to give a special shout out to our partners at Slack, Connor, Greg, Shanna, for all their help in getting us here today. What we're going to walk through in the time that we have is a little bit about what have we built and who are our users. Why did we build it, and why do we think that research and usability are so important to the design of a great Slack application? And Tad's going to come out and talk about the architecture of our application, get into some of the underlying software technologies that we've used to build this app, along with some lessons learned along the way. So let's get started. First, I want to tell you a little bit about Workday. We're a 14-year-old company born in the cloud that serves the needs of many of the world's largest organizations and enterprises. We power people to run their business. What I love about Workday is with the number of customers we have, if we're to look at all the people that we impact, it's over 40 million people who come into Workday to do things like take time off, look at their vacation balance, run their expenses, rate the candidates that are coming in to maybe join them at work. So it's a great opportunity to really change the future of work. And if we look at a founding premise of Workday from the day one, it was to put people at the heart of enterprise software. Before the cloud and before Workday, traditionally this kind of software was on-premise and really targeted not at the end user, but at the people who would run the systems. So it's classically super unpleasant to use and not particularly user-friendly. And Workday set out to change that equation and to put people at the heart of enterprise software. So it was a natural place for us to think about Slack as a place we want people to experience Workday, because it's a seamless, fluid way to engage with Workday for all those kinds of things. So here are some of the features that we've built out. For years, we've allowed peers to give each other feedback within Workday about their performance and share that information with managers when it's performance review time. We had a customer that started using this feature, and they saw a 5x increase in the amount of feedback that was received by their coworkers, simply by bringing it into the Slack user experience. Our average worker at one of our companies has thousands of data attributes about them. And rather than make people have to go into Workday to look up who their coworkers are, how long they've been with the organization, maybe even just where they sit or who they work for, we've brought that into Slack itself. If you're on the road like I am this week, I'm based out of Boulder, I'm out on the town with the team, and I'm accumulating some expenses. The last thing I want to do is lose my receipts and have to think about when I get home calling up those restaurants to get copies of my bills. Instead, I can bring up my Slack mobile application, take a picture, as you'll see, of a receipt, and just log that right into Workday, making it a lot easier to keep track of. A great company allows you to have a good work-life balance. And so one of our most popular features, no surprise, is the ability to take time off and log that into the system and do that right from your natural workspace. And then finally, we've been working on making the recruiting process in Workday far more social. One of the big impediments to business today from a hiring perspective is getting candidates offers quickly. And one of the reasons that sometimes doesn't happen in a company is that people on the interview panel don't get their ratings and reviews in. So we've built some software now inside of Slack that allows a hiring manager or recruiter to essentially ping everyone on the interview team who hasn't gotten their feedback in inside of Slack, and then provides them the ability to do those rating and reviews right in line our user experience. Why did we build this application? There was a lot of pent-up demand, and I think one of the touchstones for me when we started this project was looking at not just what customers were asking for, but what they were building. And we saw maybe a half dozen customers that were building a PTO app in Slack using Workday as the back-end system of record. And we thought to ourselves, well, if we have 6 companies building that and taking that effort, wouldn't it be great if we could just provide that out of the box to all of our customers and allow our customers to go build more value-added capabilities inside of Slack? And that's resonated really well. So a year ago, we opened up our early adopter program. We had 97 notable companies sign up, and we picked a small number that we could go really deeply with to better understand their needs and introduce them to our early adopter program. We recently launched Workday for Slack on the Slack app directory, and with that, we prepared a lot of app screenshots and marketing materials. And I want to show you the video that we used to announce the application and really essentially market it to our users and to our company. So if you could please roll the video.
Meet Workday for Slack. You spend a lot of time in Slack, talking to coworkers, sharing files, and getting things done. So why not bring your Workday right to you? On the go? Snap a pic of your receipt from anywhere. Seriously, anywhere. Slack it to Workday, and in 2 taps, it's saved. It's the same experience on desktop. Drag, drop, done. It's simple, like expenses should be. Looking for Tina? Ask Workday for Slack to look up their role, team, even where they sit, and share it with others. Knowledge is power. See something inspiring? Leave anytime feedback through Slack. Hey, nice job, Tina. Workday for Slack brings your Workday to you. It's another way we're putting people at the center of enterprise software. Add Workday for Slack today.
Oh, great, thanks. It was actually a really fun part of the project. When we got done, we engaged with our video marketing team. And at Workday, we're big users of Slack wall to wall, so everyone at Workday rallies behind the things that we do. And this video is a great piece of work that came out of that and gives you a sense of how we want our users to envision the power of bringing Workday to their Slack environment. I'm not really here to talk about what is Workday for Slack. I'm here to talk about the how, because the how is the everything. We want you to understand some of those lessons learned along our journey and how they might best apply to you in building your own best Slack app. So to do that, I want to start with the team, because that's the heart of the matter. And this is our team. It's a multidisciplinary team that we put together that's co-located in our Boulder office. And there are a few kind of notable things I'd call out around it. First, 18 months ago, I don't think there's a single person, maybe there's one person on this screen that worked at Workday. So we were organically hiring to build out the group that would build out this capability. And then secondly, almost all the team is here today at Spec. So I'm super excited about that. And as you see these folks around the conference, please introduce yourself. We'd love to learn from you, and we'd love to share our learnings. But it was a little bit more than our team. We can't really take the full credit for the application, because in building this app, we had to work with over 180 workmates to build out all those capabilities, partnering with the expense team or the time off team, going through a pretty laborious security, privacy, and legal review in order to get out the door. So it's really been an endeavor that's spanned across many different groups within our company. And as I mentioned, because we're wall-to-wall with Slack, people have just been thrilled to help us out because we get to live this product every day. So I want to talk a little bit about our approach around research and usability. And it starts with understanding who our users are. We have this great research lab now in Boulder, and we conducted dozens of interviews and sessions looking at our users and trying to get a better understanding of how they perceive Slack, how they use Slack apps, and there are a number of takeaways for us. These are tech-savvy people generally, but they're typically not software developers. They're working at large enterprises. So the typical Workday customers in the thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of customers. So that means that they're used to having multiple Slack workspaces, large communities of people, and very large numbers of apps that can be available to them inside of their environments. But they have varying levels of Slack expertise, and one of our takeaways was that we were going to have some significant portion of our users that maybe had never experienced a Slack app before. So we needed to think very clearly about how we were going to make their first Slack app experience inside of Workday for Slack an intuitive one, a smooth one for them. And these people came from all kinds of different roles. Everyone takes time off, but only recruiting managers are really interested in the core of the recruiting use cases, as an example. So what are some of the things that we learned? Keep what delights and kill what drags, and be ready to have some assumptions and challenge those assumptions over time. And we really felt like the initial user experience was most critical. So if you looked at our app maybe a year ago, this is where it stood, and we thought we kind of knocked it out of the park. We had informative text on what our app would do, we had power user shortcuts, and we had an action item menu on the bottom with a bunch of buttons. And frankly, this was a big fail. We missed in all three dimensions. When we sat down and did our user research, we found that users didn't read the text. People didn't really see the buttons because the power user shortcuts were in red, and they started right there with the shortcuts. And that led to a fair amount of user confusion and frustration. So we went back to the drawing board around what we wanted to deliver and came up with much more of a guided user experience, which I'll walk you through. It starts with an app home opened event that brings up the connection menu to Workday. And this is where a user has to go and authorize Workday for Slack to operate on their behalf as them. We keep it simple, and we bring them into Slack. We remove that connection menu because we don't want them clicking on it again. And then we prompt the user to type hi, and then bring back a menu of the things that are available to them, like looking up a coworker, which you can see here. Now, it was pretty intentional that we just didn't put that menu item up as soon as they'd connected. The reason for that is we saw that users struggled to look back in history over time to find that menu. The more they interacted with our app, the farther away in time that menu item became. So we realized by prompting them to type hi, we were essentially teaching them how to get back to this super important ability to get to the list of things that we provided. Now, this is going to continue to change. We've seen some great announcements from Slack here this morning. They're going to improve the app home experience. What I want the takeaway to be is that you got to try this stuff with users and see what they really think and take advantage of those new capabilities and then make sure it really sticks. There's some other lessons learned. Slack novice participants didn't really get ephemeral messages and slash commands, but we wanted to provide those to our power users. And so we had other ways that we explored and have delivered the ability for power users to get at those powerful commands. And even subtle things, like asking marketing if we could change the standard Workday logo to make it brighter, added to discoverability and the ability for people to find the app. We moved from our first lookup card that had these different blocks of information around a user with those bright blue bars to BlockKit. And BlockKit helped us in a number of ways. It provided a much cleaner user experience. It allowed us to add more capabilities to the user experience, such as the ability to look up who someone works for or who their direct reports are, and in turn return a BlockKit of information. It also allowed us to build a really cool feature to share this lookup card into a channel And it was really easy to deliver that because we could just repost that block kit message into a channel when you want to share a contact card. Common pattern, now brought to Slack with block kit. And we are super pumped about block kit and modals. It is our dancing parrot happy moment from Slack. It's just going to unlock a whole bunch of capabilities for us as part of our user experience. I want to walk through our expense entry use case. As I mentioned, this is super helpful when you're on the road. You can bring out your mobile phone. It starts with initiating a photo. So we brought some instructions on how to do that inside of our button action menu. And essentially, a user can then bring up their camera app inside of Slack, take a picture of a receipt. From this receipt, they can then fill in some additional information if they want to around maybe where they were or who they were with, and they can post that into Workday. And this is the sort of natural place people start with expenses. Now, Workday is pretty smart when it comes to receipts. In the background, we start to do some intelligent scanning of that receipt to fill in automatically the amount and the date. But it was now an opportunity to prompt the user to learn to do the next thing, which is a little bit more complicated, which is how to do quick expenses, non-receipt-based expense entry. So we prompt them to do that and then bring them into a richer dialogue so they can fill out things like parking fees, tolls, and other kinds of activities. So again, it was start with the simplest possible user experience, receipt entry, and then introduce the user into the next set of things that they might want to start with in the future. What are some of the design methods and tools we use to deliver these capabilities? Well, our design team uses tools like Figma to really mock out every aspect of the flow, starting with that simplest user experience. We can look at all the edge cases that happen. We can look at what happens when it's in a different currency or in a different time or date format. And we use Axure occasionally for doing prototyping, and we can put those prototypes in front of users before we begin development. But if we were to pick one super powerful tool that we love, it's Slack's Block Kit Builder. It's incredibly powerful, and there's a reason we like it so much. It's because it enforces actual design constraints. When you're building software, one of the challenges from a design perspective is that the data can vary. Someone could have a really long username. Someone could enter in a paragraph of text around that expense. What's that going to actually look like in Slack when we display it? The Block Kit Builder allows us to preview those changes right within Slack itself to see how it's going to appear, and provides for this really great iteration between code and design that allows us to build much, much faster. So it's really a tool that we very much suggest that you use and adopt as part of your workflow. So now that I've covered, who our users are, how we've approached them, some of our design tools, I'd like to welcome Todd Vancil out to the stage. He's our principal architect for Workday for Slack, and he's going to talk a little bit about some of the underpinnings of our software.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Josh. That was great. I'm Todd Vancil. I'm the architect on the Natural Workspaces team. And again, I want to thank Slack for inviting us over to Spec to talk about our solution here for Workday for Slack. When we started the journey, we really had two pretty large bodies of work. We had the Slack API with the developer community, application installs, and we had Workday, very large ecosystem as he talked about, hundreds of features. There are APIs there in Workday, so we really wanted to be an intermediate system between those two. Design choices everybody has, what stack are we going to run, where are we going to run it, how big do we have to go. Early on, we wanted to go in a kind of standard serverless pattern. And standard these days has changed a little bit, but I'll talk about that in a moment. As you can see, there's kind of three basic components we looked at. One is where are we going to run our code? Well, that was serverless, as in AWS Lambda. We needed some glue. Everybody knows features change, modules change, formatters change. We needed some glue, so we used SNS to kind of send messages back and forth between these functions. And with any piece of software, we have to store data. And I'm going to talk a little bit about DynamoDB. There's a good joke in there. So this is our architecture today. Most of the requests kind of come through AWS CloudFront. This allows global distribution, some caching, resilience, allows it to route it into that API gateway. Oh, I like that picture. And then into the functions. I'm going to talk about these functions in just a second. Down in the lower right, we do have a static website. On an enterprise grade, you're going to have marketing materials. It allows us for access controls as well as some installation procedures. And then over on the far left, we have the DynamoDB. And I do want to make a little quip here about the debate rages on in our internal team whether we should be using a NoSQL or a standard relational database system. So as the requests come through our system, one of the great ideas that came out of the team was this concept of our front door. So the front door handles all inbound requests that come through the system. This allows a single verification point, as well as we learned last year in Slack, there can be some duplicate messages. So this allows us to cache and dedupe at that level. And I do want to have a small plug to our internal processes at Workday. Depending on what scale you're designing and developing at, you might need to have a penetration test done internally or externally, and the smaller the surface area, the better this is going to be. Additionally, with some of this piece, it allows for the Slack configuration to be relatively easy. Whoever's set up a Slack API, there are several endpoints, whether it's a / command or a messaging endpoint, so it simplifies setup in that regard as well. Once the front door receives all this information, it kind of sends it off into these conceptual idea of routers. So as Josh talked about, we have a lot of features. We have expense lookup, we have user lookup, interview feedback, and it's going to keep growing. So we needed a way for this front door to start sending this information out. Let me move forward here. So we call them kind of feature lambdas. So this is an actual diagram from one of the engineers on the team. And you can see that the router kind of picks up this information, starts shipping data around. The squares really are the lambdas, and then the pipes are the SNS queue. That allows us to kind of rework the features from routers, processors, and formatters. A small shout out to the formatter piece. When we originally designed it, the formatters were pretty narrow in the UI, and then when BlockKit came along, we were able to just modify the formatters and send that stuff out. So as you guys design and develop these things, think about modularity through routers, processors, and formatters. So the one last piece on this is more of a team component. As I stated, the lambdas and the SNS, but you can see this is our stream of work as well. So as you break down a development team, depending on how many resources you have the ability through serverless to just create small functions, bodies of work, whether they have to be consumed by a large team, work a very large story, or small teams, whether it's send messages. So as everybody knows, there's always constraints and considerations. So in enterprise development, there are a couple of things that you should think about. So at Workday, there are a lot of environments. Customers have things such as sandbox, impl, dev, QA, production. So that's just the Workday world. And if you've done any development, you know that customers might have implementation tenants for Slack as well. So now we've just talking about 8 environments, depending on how you're binding it. So one of the things we thought of was give self-diagnostic tools to users. This allows them to send us information. Hey, what are you connected to today? So I would suggest if you're doing this, put diagnostic tools. This is a fun one, and I tried to come up with a really cool sentence: compliance future-proofing. So again, depending on what customer environment you're going into, GDPR is probably an issue. So from the beginning, make sure you understand what you're doing there. Slack has some tools through eDiscovery to remove data. Workday has its world, and then we're an intermediate, so we have to have ours. So just be very aware of what you need to do in that. The second one's a great one, SOC 2 compliant. That's a big, big world. It depends on how you're designing and whether your customers are requiring this. So things like who's doing the check-in, when it happened, as well as environment access. These controls are pretty easy to set up in the beginning. It's a little harder in the end, so think about that. And then the last one, data residency. Germans want their data in Germany. So as you architect this, make sure that your system can be distributed worldwide, as well as having whatever you need in those regions. We're working with Slack right now to help us through some of these situations in an app. And I want to have a small special call out to Enterprise Grid. Your app will be installed into an Enterprise Grid. And there are some notes on Slack APIs about testing it and understanding it. There are some gotchas here. I think the Slack team's doing a great job now. Org apps are coming. This is going to be really cool for us. When you install an app into a workspace, the bot user shows up in all workspaces in the enterprise grid. Now, that's a little bit of an issue. And why is this an issue? Because you might not have installed it in the other workspace, but the bot shows up there. You don't have the bot token. So you can imagine A and B, and we're having a little bit of a communication problem. These are things you can test. There are some workarounds, depending on what you're trying to do, and help the users, but it is a challenge. So read the docs and go forward. So I'm going to hand it back to Josh, and thanks a lot.
Great, thanks, Tad. So our journey is really just beginning. As you can see, making research and design is essential, in our opinion, to building a great enterprise app. Understand your users, get a good sense of who they are, how they use the app, and continually validate the assumptions that you have about what the best user experience is going to be for them. And then architect for modularity. Keep the needs of the enterprise customer in mind. You know, Tad's very right. We have customers that go out the door and they say, hey, we want to enable this in our production environment tomorrow, we're just ready to go. And then we have customers that say, hey, we've got like 3 sandbox environments and 2 test Slack workspaces, and it's all secured with 2 FA. Like, we want to really step through that in a more methodical way. Just be ready from an environment and testing perspective for some of those challenges. If you do that, I think you'll end up in a really great place. So as I mentioned, we're here. Tad and I are here, and our whole team really is here. So we're super excited to be part of this community. I know we're running right into the lunch hour. So rather than taking questions here, we'll let everyone get to lunch, but please come connect with us at the conference. We want to learn more from you. If you happen to be a Workday customer, that's great. Thank you so much. You can learn more about our app at slack.workday.com. And finally, you can connect with Tad and myself on Twitter at our handles here. So thank you all so much for the opportunity to speak, and look forward to talking with you at the conference.